Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning into this story. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I've worked as a night shift security guard at a local TV station for nearly 5 years. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but I've always liked the quiet. Checking the same corridors hour after hour, making sure each studio is locked, the lights are off when they should be, and that everyone who's supposed to be out is actually out. Routine can be comforting. It lulls you into thinking you understand how the world works. But all it takes is one evening to shatter that illusion. I'm writing this from an empty editing room, hoping someone will eventually read it. I've barricaded the door with chairs and some heavy camera equipment. It's surprisingly quiet right now. I can hear a few distant thumps and the occasional shuffle of steps echoing down the corridor, but nothing too close. I'm not sure if that's a good sign or if it means something is waiting for me just around the corner. Either way, I need to get this all down, every detail, so someone, someday, understands what really happened here. My shift started at 10 p.m., which was normal. I always arrive a little early, clock in, and do a handover briefing with the day guard. Usually they just wave me through and say, all quiet on the Western Front. That night the day guard, a friend of mine named Russell, looked a bit uneasy. Something's off, he told me in a hushed voice, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. There's an extra group in Studio 2. Some comedic clown act filming a late-night segment. But they've been acting very strange. One of them looked like he was limping pretty badly, and I overheard him mumbling about feeling ill. I shrugged it off, figuring a performer might just have a twisted ankle or be a little under the weather. That kind of thing isn't unheard of. The station often records quirky segments for smaller shows that air during odd hours. Sometimes the participants are freelancers who come in tired, stressed, or unwell. It usually doesn't turn into anything major. Russell's shift ended, and I started my routine. I made a quick pass around the building. Reception was quiet. The late-night newsroom crew was typing away at computers, and most of the editing bays were empty, save for the soft glow of a single monitor here or there. Then I headed to the studios. Studio 2 is tucked at the far end of a long hallway. On a normal day, it's used for talk shows or small live segments. That night, all the overhead lights were on, so I could see people moving around behind the large windows that let you look in from the corridor. A stage manager waved me in, saying they needed help with a small crowd control matter. This was unusual. Crowds rarely come in for a middle-of-the-night taping, but I obliged. Inside, a producer was organizing a group of 5 or 6 performers in clown outfits. Big, colorful wigs, bright shoes, lots of face paint. The stage was set up like a small circus ring, complete with balloons and a backdrop of swirling colors. The show's host, Lucy Anders, was seated to one side, going over note cards. Despite the cheerful setting, there was a tension in the air. While I stood there, one clown caught my eye. He seemed unsteady, occasionally clutching a side table to support himself. Every once in a while, he would jerk his head as if trying to clear a dizzy spell. I asked him if he needed assistance, but he waved me off, insisting he was fine. "Long day," he said, sounding a bit breathless. "I'll be good once the cameras roll." I noticed the makeup around his eyes was smudged, almost as if he'd been sweating or rubbing them too hard. But I saw no obvious cause for alarm, so I left him to the production staff. Nothing in my experience as a security guard prepared me for the possibility that this could be the start of something massive. At around 11 p.m., the camera started rolling for a short segment to be aired later that night. Lucy greeted the audience at home, even though there was no real in-studio audience, and introduced the clown troupe as a local comedic sensation known for improvisational skits. Their leader, a middle-aged performer named Eddie, stepped forward to do a short interview. As he spoke, I noticed how pale he looked under his face paint. He stammered, lost his train of thought, and Lucy tried her best to keep the show moving. Then the clowns began their routine. It started out silly, juggling props, tossing confetti, honking little horns. But a minute or two in, the unsteady clown abruptly stopped, dropping his juggling clubs. He gripped the edge of the stage prop and took several shaky breaths. Lucy turned to him concerned, and the camera operators zoomed in. "Everything all right over there?" Lucy asked gently. Suddenly, the clown stumbled forward and let out a moan that didn't sound like any typical expression of pain. In one swift moment, he fell against Lucy, knocking her off balance. She hit the studio floor with a microphone clatter. The clown tried to speak, but what came out was a strained, rasping sound. Alarmed, the other clowns rushed over, but this performer began lashing out as if in a daze. Half the stage crew ran in to break it up, while the other half froze, unsure what to do. People scrambled to shut off the cameras or switch to a test pattern. I saw the red recording lights go off on the main cameras, but it was too late. Some part of the episode had already been broadcast live. The last thing anyone saw at home was Lucy on the floor, wide-eyed, as the clown collapsed again. The control room quickly cut to an emergency station ID. I hurried into the studio with two other security guards, Martin and Beth. We tried to keep the crowd calm and get some space. Lucy was helped to her feet. She was shaken but didn't seem seriously hurt. The clown, on the other hand, was in rough shape. He was breathing in shallow gasps and seemed confused. He'd look at people like he recognized them. Then his gaze would drift away as if he had forgotten who they were. We had a first aid station down the hall. Beth guided Lucy there, while Martin and I helped the clown onto a folding chair. A paramedic was called, but we were told it could be a while before they arrived. The clown's fellow performers gathered around him. A couple of them seemed frightened, sweating, pale, blinking rapidly. I asked if they had been exposed to anything, or if they had all eaten the same food. Nobody had a clear answer. Then, as quickly as he'd weakened, the clown lurched forward. His hand shot out and gripped Martin's uniform. Martin tried to pull away, and the clown let out a sound somewhere between a moan and a gasp. It was so sudden that Martin lost his balance. He stumbled backward, landing on the studio floor. A few staff members rushed to help him up, but we were all so puzzled by the clown's erratic behavior that we didn't notice the others in the troupe starting to sway, almost in unison. Within minutes, the entire group of clowns looked ill, some more than others. One of the stagehands began coughing violently, claiming he felt strange after helping them with costumes. At this point, the producer called for the segment to be cancelled entirely, and the studio lights were dimmed. We needed to assess the situation, get medical assistance, and figure out what was going on. Our TV station, like many others, has a set of protocols for emergencies. These range from fire drills to severe weather procedures. There's also a lockdown protocol if there's a threat to staff safety. Given that a few people seem to be losing full control, the station manager decided to lock down the entire building for the night, only letting medical personnel inside when they arrived. As security guards, Martin, Beth, and I were tasked with clearing hallways and making sure everyone stayed either in locked offices or inside the main lobby until paramedics could do a proper assessment. This quickly became an uphill battle. The unwell clowns and the people who had been tending to them were growing more and more anxious. Some were drifting in and out of lucidity, while others were stumbling around, arms hanging slack at their sides, eyes unfocused. Beth tried to assist Lucy, who seemed mostly okay but still shaken. They'd gone to the break room near the back of the building. Martin headed to the control room to coordinate with the station manager, leaving me to check the corridors for any stragglers or unauthorized visitors. As I walked, I noticed a heavy tension in the air, like the atmosphere just before a thunderstorm. The overhead lights flickered occasionally, though I'm not sure if that was my imagination or something actually going on with the power. Each closed door I passed felt like it was hiding something. I tried to remain calm. This was, after all, my job, to keep people safe and maintain order. I reached the editing bays near the back of the station. Usually, this area is deserted at night, aside from a few people editing clips. But I found two staffers leaning against a wall, breathing hard. Both said they felt extremely weak and had headaches. Their faces glistened with perspiration, and they had a distant look in their eyes. I offered to help them to the break room, but they waved me off, saying they just needed a moment to gather themselves. That's when I noticed something else. One of them had on a wristband from the clown act, like a novelty item the troupe had handed out. The other had face paint smudges around his collar, as if he'd been in close contact with one of the performers. Alarm bells started going off in my mind. This was not just one sick person. It might have been something contagious. I told them they should at least sit down, but before I could escort them anywhere, they both lost focus. One seemed to faint briefly, sliding down the wall. I radioed Martin for help, but only got static. Frustrated, I gently tried to guide the staffer who had fainted to lie down safely on the floor. As I did, the other employee, still standing, let out a startled gasp and lurched away from me as if my touch alarmed him. I asked what was wrong, but he just stared, unresponsive. Something was spreading. Fear or illness or both. I'd never seen multiple people suddenly become so dizzy and disoriented. My concerns escalated rapidly. Could the clown show have brought in some type of virus? If so, how serious was it? I managed to help the staffer who'd fainted onto a nearby couch in the editing lounge and left the other standing by the wall. I needed to get medical professionals here quickly. If we truly had a health emergency, station protocol required me to contact local authorities. I jogged back towards the central lobby. Along the way, I passed the corridor leading to Studio 2 again. The door was open a crack. I heard the faint hum of the overhead lights and what sounded like muffled conversation. Peeking in, I saw something disturbing. Two of the clowns were sitting on the floor, leaning against each other. They appeared to be breathing heavily, occasionally letting out soft moans. Another clown, Eddie, whom I recognized as the leader, was standing with his arms hanging at his sides, rocking slightly. A few people were trying to speak to him, to see if he was still coherent. He would respond with a quiet mumble, then fall silent. Everyone looked exhausted, as though they'd been through some sort of marathon in just a few minutes. Just as I decided to move on, one of the people inside the studio noticed me through the door. It was the stage manager, who waved frantically, motioning for help. I hurried inside, intending to give any aid I could. "We can't get a signal on our phones," the stage manager said, his voice trembling. "It's like everything's jammed or something. We tried to call for an ambulance, but there's no service in here." That was strange. We usually had full coverage inside the building. I tried my own phone, no signal. The station had a landline in the main office, so I told the stage manager I'd try that next. Before I could leave, Eddie suddenly jerked his head up and locked eyes with me. The intensity in his gaze was unsettling. I couldn't tell if he recognized me or not. After a moment, he looked away, as if losing interest. I rushed towards the control room, hoping to use the landline or the intercom system. On my way there, I passed by the news floor, where a few anchors and technical staffers were still working on a late broadcast. They too complained of phone outages. One anchor told me that the live feed had cut off unexpectedly, and they were stuck airing a loop of pre-recorded segments. The control room staff was trying to fix the broadcast problem, but something was interfering with the signal. When I finally reached the control room, I found Martin and the station manager, Miss Harper, in a tense discussion. Miss Harper was on an old-fashioned corded phone that connected directly to the telephone company line, one of those old setups that sometimes still worked during power outages or network failures. She turned to me, covering the mouthpiece. "The emergency services line is swamped," she said. "I can't get through to the local hospital. There's some big event going on around town." She paused, glancing at Martin. "You say people in the building are collapsing?" And I explained that more and more people were showing odd symptoms. Some were dizzy, some were weak, and at least one clown had lost all sense of normal behavior. Miss Harper's face went pale, and she nodded solemnly. "I'll keep trying to get through," she said quietly. "Martin, help him with crowd control. We need to keep everyone calm." Before we could strategize, the station monitors flickered with an eerie static. The feed that was supposed to be playing a pre-recorded show kept cutting to black. Then, abruptly, I saw a glimpse of the live camera feed from Studio 2 flash onto the monitors. It showed two clowns hunched over. Their makeup was streaked, and their motions were slow, almost mechanical. The camera angle was crooked, as if someone had knocked over the tripod. Then the picture went dark again. Martin and I decided to split up. He would look for Lucy and Beth, while I tried to find any staff members who might still be unaccounted for. Our station isn't huge, but it has enough corners and hidden rooms that it can be easy to lose track of people. We also wanted to locate the exit doors and see if they were still secure. The lockdown protocol required them to be locked from the inside to prevent unauthorized entry, but we needed to confirm they hadn't been tampered with or jammed in some way. I went down a hallway leading to a side exit. The overhead lights flickered again. At the end of the hall stood a figure in a bright outfit. My heart rate sped up. I could tell it was one of the clowns, but I couldn't see which one. As I approached, I realized it was the clown who had first shown signs of illness in the studio. He was facing the wall, shoulders trembling slightly. "Are you okay?" I asked, keeping my distance. No response. He didn't turn around, didn't move aside. He just kept trembling. I stepped closer, about to gently place a hand on his shoulder, but something held me back. A feeling of dread. Instead, I spoke again, raising my voice slightly. "We have a first aid station. Can I help you get there?" He let out a low, unsettled sound, then slowly turned his head toward me. His eyes were half closed, but his expression was one of confusion and discomfort. Then he looked back at the wall. I decided to step around him carefully, giving him space. The side exit door was locked, which was good. It meant no one had broken out or forced entry. I tried to see if the clown was able to walk on his own, but he wouldn't budge from that spot. I left him there, feeling uneasy. Something about his behavior felt entirely unnatural. It wasn't just sickness. It seemed as if he was in a sort of trance. By the time I returned to the control room, Miss Harper had managed to contact local authorities. She relayed that something bigger was happening outside the station. Ambulances were overwhelmed. People in other parts of the city were reporting strange symptoms, and some roads were even blocked. It sounded like whatever had affected the clown troupe was not confined to our building alone. Martin came in soon after. He reported that Lucy and Beth were locked in the break room, safe for the moment. He also added that several staffers were now moving about in a daze, and we had to find a way to keep them from wandering off. Miss Harper suggested we gather everyone who still seemed healthy in one secure location, preferably the main lobby, so we could keep track of people more easily. Martin and I agreed. We each took a flashlight and portable radio and headed off in different directions again, calling out to staff and telling them to make their way to the lobby. Those who looked ill or disoriented, we escorted gently, making sure they had a place to sit. The station, once buzzing with the usual behind-the-scenes hustle, was eerily quiet now. Instead of the hum of conversation and the clack of keyboards, there was a hushed tension, broken only by the occasional cough or shuffle of feet. The air felt stale, as if the ventilation system wasn't circulating properly. Over the intercom, Miss Harper tried to maintain some semblance of order, calmly instructing people to remain where they were if they felt too weak to walk, and announcing that we were waiting for medical assistance. By midnight, about a dozen of us, those who were still clear-headed enough, had gathered in the main lobby. We had a mix of security personnel, on-air talent, camera operators and production staff. Some were seated on the floor with their backs against the wall. Lucy was there too, looking drained but holding it together. She had insisted on staying awake, sipping water from a paper cup. One of the clown performers was also among us, a younger individual named Kara. She said she felt under the weather, but was managing to stay upright. According to Kara, their troupe had traveled from another city a few days earlier to do a series of performances. Several members had complained of feeling unwell that morning, but they wrote it off as anxiety or travel fatigue. "I didn't think it could be something serious," she said, eyes filled with concern. "But now, everything is different." Martin and I stood by the reception desk, quietly discussing what to do next. Should we attempt to leave the building and look for medical aid? Or should we stay put and wait for the authorities? The storm of confusion outside was intensifying. Reports of widespread disruption suggested it might not be safer beyond our walls. Suddenly, the intercom crackled again. Miss Harper's voice came through, but the tone was different this time, urgent, a hint of fear beneath the surface. "Attention, everyone in the station. We have a situation. There are more people showing signs of disorientation. If you are feeling unwell, please remain where you are. Otherwise, lock yourself in a secure area. I repeat, find a secure area." Martin and I looked at each other. We had just spent the last half hour gathering people in the lobby. Now we were being told to lock ourselves away? Something must have escalated. Then the overhead lights blinked off for a second, plunging us into darkness. A hum of tension passed through the group. The lights flickered back on, still dim. The crowd in the lobby grew uneasy. A couple of people started asking if we should attempt to escape through the back exit. Lucy tried to calm them, reminding everyone that the outside world was in chaos too, according to Miss Harper's earlier updates. I took a moment to check my radio. Static. I tried turning it to different channels. Nothing. Communication within the building seemed to be failing. My phone was still useless. Not long afterward, we heard muffled sounds from the hallway that led toward the studios, like someone stumbling or knocking things over. I peered around the corner, flashlight in hand. The corridor was dim, illuminated only by emergency lights. A few shapes moved at the far end, slowly and aimlessly. I recognized the silhouettes of at least 2 of the clowns from earlier, plus a stagehand. They seemed to be wandering without direction, their motions sluggish. Occasionally, one would lean against the wall, as if exhausted, and then continue forward. We watched in tense silence, not wanting to startle them or draw attention. One figure brushed against a metal trash bin, making a loud clang. That caused the entire group to freeze momentarily, heads tilting in unison, listening for something. Then they resumed drifting through the corridor. I ducked back into the lobby, heart pounding. Lucy had overheard the noise and gave me a questioning look. "We need to keep quiet," I whispered. "They're heading this way. Let's make sure all the doors to the lobby are closed and locked." We quickly secured the doors. Thankfully, the main lobby entrance had sturdy double doors that locked from the inside. The only other entrances were side corridors, which we also secured with internal locks. For a while, we all just waited. Some people paced, others sat quietly, heads in their hands. The unknown weighed heavily on us. It felt like the entire world was stuck in a slow-motion spiral. We had no idea what was happening outside our walls, aside from Miss Harper's vague updates about citywide disruptions. I checked my watch. A little after 1 a.m., that's only 3 hours into my shift, yet it felt like a lifetime since the clown troupe's performance began. Kara, the young clown, sat off to one side, hugging her knees. I approached to see if she needed anything. She looked up at me with tired eyes. "I never wanted to scare people," she said quietly. "I got into clowning because it was fun, making people smile. Now look at this." I didn't know what to say. Words of comfort felt hollow. Instead, I just nodded, trying to convey some sense of reassurance without false promises. Across the lobby, Lucy stood, arms folded, staring at the blank TV monitors that usually displayed the station's programming lineup. They were all dark, as if mocking our inability to broadcast anything. In that moment, I recalled how cheerful she'd been on countless segments, how she had a warm presence that drew viewers in. Now she looked worn out, the bright spark in her eyes diminished by fear and exhaustion. After some time, Miss Harper's voice returned on the intercom, quieter and more strained. "This is an update for anyone still able to hear. Local authorities have advised staying indoors. The situation outside is complicated. If you have a safe space to remain, please do so." Her voice wavered. She sounded as if she wanted to say more but didn't know how. Then the transmission cut off again. Some in our group started to panic. "We can't just stay here," one person said. "We need to get out, find real help." Kara looked torn, as did Lucy and a few others. Nobody wanted to wander blindly into potential danger, yet staying put felt risky, especially if more people became disoriented. Finally, Martin suggested we try to communicate with Miss Harper directly. The control room had a dedicated phone line, even if our personal devices weren't working. Since Martin was more familiar with the building's layout, he volunteered to go. I said I'd accompany him, but he insisted he'd be faster alone. If I left, then the lobby would be without any official security presence. With so many anxious people gathered, we agreed it was best if I stayed to keep the situation calm. Martin slipped out through a side corridor that led to the control room. The rest of us remained huddled in the lobby, unsure of what might happen next. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling heavier than the last. The occasional noise from distant parts of the station kept us on edge. Every once in a while, I checked the doors to confirm they were still locked. Outside, through the glass windows, we saw only darkness. The streetlights appeared dim, and no cars passed by. Even the occasional hum of traffic had disappeared. Kara dozed off, her head tilted against the wall. Lucy tried to keep everyone's spirits up, offering gentle words of encouragement. "We're going to be okay," she said, though her voice trembled a bit. A couple of staffers rummaged through a vending machine in the corner, distributing water bottles and small snacks. It was surreal, like we were stuck in a strange overnight camp instead of a news station. After what felt like an hour, though it might have been less, Martin returned looking shaken. He locked the corridor door behind him and took a moment to catch his breath. We all gathered around, eager for any news. "I made it to the control room," he said, his voice hushed. "Miss Harper was there, but she's not doing well. I tried to get her to leave with me, but she insisted on staying to monitor the broadcast. The telephone lines are still unreliable. She told me that the city's emergency centers are overloaded. Authorities advised us to remain in lockdown. They can't guarantee help anytime soon." He paused, glancing around at everyone's worried faces. "And there's more. The station's broadcast has been hijacked by a looping message. Something about a public health advisory. We can't seem to override it. Ms. Harper said some staffers in other areas of the building are now unresponsive. She's worried it's only a matter of time before we run out of resources." A heavy silence followed. None of us wanted to think about how dire the situation had become, not just in the station, but in the surrounding city. If the emergency lines were jammed, who knew how many people were in need of help? The night dragged on. A few people dozed fitfully while others paced. Lucy wrote notes on a pad, trying to keep track of who was present and who might still be missing. Kara occasionally mumbled that she felt dizzy, but she stayed alert enough to communicate. At around 2:30 a.m., the overhead lights flickered again, then dropped in intensity. We were left with only the faint glow of the emergency lighting. A hush fell over the lobby. My stomach twisted in knots as I realized that the building might lose power entirely if the grid outside was compromised. Suddenly, from the hallway, came a series of faint thumps. Someone or something was moving around, brushing against walls or doors. We huddled closer, hearts pounding. Martin took a flashlight, and I accompanied him to investigate. We walked slowly, staying close to the wall. At the corner, we paused. There, in the dim emergency light, we saw a figure lying on the floor. It was one of the stagehands, a man named Ross. He seemed very weak, barely able to lift his head. Martin knelt beside him, speaking softly. Ross tried to respond, but only managed a low murmur. His movements were sluggish. A single watery tear slid down his cheek. We carefully helped him to his feet, supporting him as we guided him back to the lobby. Each step felt like it could be his last. When we re-entered the lobby, Lucy and Kara rushed over. They cleared a spot on the floor so Ross could rest. He looked around with half-focused eyes, as if seeing us through a haze. Time crawled. My watch showed 3:15 a.m. We took turns keeping an eye on the doors, listening for any sign that help might arrive. Occasionally we heard strange noises echo through the corridors, scraping or soft footfalls. We all hoped it was just staffers drifting around, but we feared the worst. One of the production staffers, a woman named Susan, decided to check the break room for more supplies. Martin offered to go with her. They left, and I resumed my post near the lobby entrance. A sense of dread loomed. I couldn't shake the feeling that the entire building was slowly closing in on us. Lucy approached, her face etched with worry. We have to decide what to do. Staying here might be safe for now, but if no rescue comes, we'll be stuck. If we try to leave, who knows what's out there? I nodded, not sure how to respond. We had no good options, only uncertain ones. As if to confirm our fears, the building's power gave a final shudder around 4 a.m. All overhead lights blinked off, leaving us in near darkness apart from a few battery-powered lanterns and flashlights. The vending machines went dark. The hum of the air conditioning died away. A new kind of silence took over, heavier and more profound. In the lobby's dim light, we formed a small circle and quietly discussed our plans. Some wanted to attempt an escape, to see if they could reach a hospital or emergency center on foot. Others believed the outside was likely in worse shape than we imagined, and that the station was the only structure keeping us sheltered. Lucy suggested a compromise. A scouting party of 2 or 3 volunteers could go to the parking garage connected to the station. If any vehicles were still operational, they could drive to the nearest hospital or police station. If the path was blocked or unsafe, they'd return. After a short debate, Martin volunteered, along with a camera operator named Devin. I told them I'd remain behind to protect everyone else. Though I felt torn about letting Martin go, it seemed like the best approach. They gathered flashlights and any supplies we could spare, a few bottled waters, protein bars, a small first aid kit. Kara offered her clown jacket for warmth, but Martin politely declined, saying it might draw attention for the wrong reasons. "Wish us luck," Martin said, giving my shoulder a squeeze before heading out. After they left, the rest of us sat quietly, listening to the faint sounds of their footsteps fade down the corridor. Every minute stretched out, anxiety gnawing at our minds. Some folks dozed off, leaning against the walls. Others stared blankly, lost in thought. Ross, still weak, occasionally muttered incoherently about lights and laughter. I took a moment to scan the faces around me. Lucy was trying to calm Susan, who had returned from the break room in tears, complaining that the power outage had left everything in complete darkness. Kara cradled her head, wincing now and then. I worried she might succumb to the same strange state affecting others, but she insisted she was just tired. We waited. Half an hour, then 2. No sign of Martin and Devin. The hope that they might return with news, or better yet, with a functioning vehicle, began to fade. Sometime around 6 a.m., I realized that dawn should be approaching soon, but the windows still showed a murky pre-dawn sky. We were close to the threshold of a new day, yet it felt like time was standing still. Suddenly, Lucy's phone buzzed once. In the silence, it startled everyone. She fumbled to check the screen, but it went dark immediately after, its battery nearly depleted. However, that brief moment revealed she had a single unread text message. "Stay inside. Unsafe outside." It was unclear who had sent it, or if it was even recent. The phone died before she could see more. The vague warning only deepened our uncertainty. Now, as I write this, the emergency lights are fading. Our flashlights flicker. It must be close to 7 a.m., perhaps later. The sky outside is slightly brighter, yet there's an unsettling stillness. No traffic, no voices from the street, just a pale, empty horizon. Ross continues to mumble in the corner and Kara leans against a wall, eyes closed. Lucy stands by the reception desk, arms folded, as if bracing for something. Susan and a few others sit in anxious silence, hoping Martin and Devin might still return. I can't say what will happen next. The clown show that started all this, those performers are still somewhere in the station, at least the ones who haven't wandered away or collapsed. Every so often we hear a distant shuffle or a soft, indistinct sound. It reminds me that we're not truly alone in this building, though we have no idea how many others are still moving about. We've reached the point where staying or leaving both feel equally terrifying. My gut says that venturing outside might not be any safer, given the warnings and the breakdown in communication. But with food and water running low, how long can we hold out here? I'm going to set this account aside now. I have no idea who will read it or if it will even matter. Maybe help will arrive. Maybe Martin and Devin will come back with a car, or Miss Harper will find a way to restore our broadcast and call for rescue. Or maybe everything ends here in the station, a small pocket of confusion in a much larger crisis unfolding beyond these walls. All I know is that the day shift is long overdue, and I'm not sure there's a next shift coming. If you find this record, please understand that we tried to do the right thing. We tried to stay calm, follow protocol, and help each other. The clown show was just a silly segment, a bit of late-night entertainment. None of us ever imagined it would set off a chain reaction like this. For now, we'll keep the lobby doors locked and hope for sunrise. If the world out there is anything like what we've witnessed inside, then we may be witnessing the beginning of something far beyond our control. The only option left is to wait, stay vigilant, and do our best to survive what comes next. Thank you for listening. If this story sent shivers down your spine, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps this channel alive. Until next time, stay vigilant and remember, curiosity can be quite the companion, and sometimes a curse.